Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today I want to compare two PCIe Gen 4 generation SSDs. So those of you that have followed this channel for a while, you know that there's not many PCIe Gen 4 SSDs that I've not reviewed and benchmarked here on the channel. I've done PC benchmarks, we've done designer specification comparisons, we've done PS5 testing and more. And in today's video I want to do a nice quick summary of everything about we know about these two SSDs and help you decide which one is best for you. But before we go any further, a few disclaimers. This is the Seagate Firecuda 530, but as you can tell, it is slightly different to the majority. This is the Star Wars upgraded kind of special edition, and although it here is on camera, I'm not really referring to this specific model. I'm talking about the Firecuda 530 series in general, so kind of ignore the design on there. It's just the only one that had its original retail box here that we've got for the studio. The other thing is this. Today we are looking at the SN850X, the latest generation of WD Black 7K generation SSD, but when I do need to talk about the heatsink, I will be talking about this, the older generation, which has got a very similar heatsink indeed. So although you can see this on table with the Star Warsy branded version of the Star Wars of the Seagate drive and a non-heatsink version, occasionally I'm going to be flicking to that other one for the sake of design purposes. And the last thing, as mentioned in the intro, this is going to be about talking about what we know about the drives, comparing specifications, and helping you decide which is best for you. If you want to see performance benchmarks and see how they perform in an i5 6-core Gen test machine, as well as benchmarks for PS5 and PC gaming, check out the back catalogue of the channel, because all of that stuff is there with testing, real tests, to show you how all of these drives compare. But with further ado, let's crack on with business. Now, the WD Black arrived in August 2022, the WD Black SN850X. The reason it arrived that late, comparative to others out there, because actually WD Black were not the last people to produce an SSD cracking 7K. They were indeed the first. Back in September, October of 2022, they released the WD Black SN850. It was the first drive to arrive with over 7,000 megabytes per second reported sequential read transfer rates there, and at that time it blew everyone out the water. Only really Samsung had challenged them at that point. Now, over the 2 years since then, almost 2 years, many other brands have released their own 7K SSDs. Seagate released theirs almost a year later, in fact, but when they released theirs, it was basically, it blew everyone out of the water in terms of performance, in terms of durability. The only place it didn't beat everyone was price, because even now, in summer 2022, it is not a cheap little drive. Star Wars or normal, heatsink or not, it's still one of the most expensive drives on the market. So yes, it's one of the fastest and the most durable that we'll talk about later on, but it's not by no means the cheapest. And you may not need all of those factors, another reason why we're going to talk about in today's video. But because of that, and because of other brands bringing out upgraded versions of their SSDs with improved NAND, improved controllers, and just generally challenging the superiority of the WD Black at that point, WD released the SN850X. This is a scaled up, improved version of their original WD Black drive. It doesn't replace it, because this still exists in the family. Indeed, there's another WD Black as well, SSD, that we'll talk about another time. But right now, when you're looking at buying an SSD, whether it is for PC or console gaming, or just generally you've bought a PCIe Gen 4 system, these two are kind of the top tier. They're the ones that get the most coverage for their own respective reasons. Now, in terms of price, as I've already touched on, this one wins. This one is way more expensive. The Firecuda, due to a lot of its architectural choices, and they're aiming for the sky, the result is it makes it very tough for Seagate to produce and sell this drive more affordably. But there's another reason why the WD Black, be it in the old version or the new version, happens to be that little bit more affordable. And that is because of in-house development. Some people aren't aware that when you are looking at different SSDs in the market, there is a very distinct difference between brands that develop everything in-house and other brands that partner with other brands and use their R&D, use their hardware, use their development. And this is a classic example of that. So In the case of WD and the WD Black SN850X and the one that came out in 2022, the controller is an in-house controller developed between WD and SanDisk. The NAND that's used inside is a combination of SanDisk and Coaxa development, all of which are WD subsidiaries. I believe the only thing inside it that one could perhaps question as a third-party element would be the Micron memory that's utilized inside, and even then there's crossover at different factory levels. So the result is, when you go for the WD Black drive, you are getting a drive where the whole thing is developed in-house at the same time, with all of the components being developed in a very geared, very narrow, very focused manner towards the product. That means that warranty replacement, that means that pricing and controlling resources and production is a great deal more fluid and easier for WD overall. And it's the reason why, even after 2 years, even after this less than a month old at the time of recording, even with that in the mix, the WD seemingly arrives with more flash sales and deals periodically, and just generally a better price per terabyte when it goes to opting for that. Whereas the Firecuda, one of the reasons among many that it is much more expensive isn't just because of that reaching for the sun, Icarus, flying too close to the sun, development towards its peaks of performance and more, but although the SSD is Seagate branded and there are elements of it that are produced at Seagate, the controller inside is the Phison E18, developed by Phison, who have produced one of the most critically acclaimed SSD controllers for PCIe Gen 4 in the market, which is also used by Sir Brent, by Kingston, by a myriad, 20 to 25 mainline SSD companies out there. So that controller needs to be a bit more broader in how it's utilized. The NAND that is used inside is Micron NAND on board, and although it is exceptionally high quality, a 176 layer 3D TLC NAND, a pinch higher than that of the WD, it is still third party as well. Same goes with the memory inside, and just overall, although it does use the very best of the SSD industry right now on that little PCB, even the heatsink that we talked about there that I'll show you in just a moment is an EKK. It is a gamer high-end focus, incredibly high quality heatsink that allows the drive to run a lot cooler than most SSDs in the market. The fact still remains, all of these things add up to not only a drive that is more expensive on the RRP recommended retail price, but also a smaller scope for reductions, a smaller scope for creating more creative prices. And therefore, when it comes to spending the old money, if how much you're spending is important, the WD is going to win it for you. But value for money, what you're getting for your money, then the Seagate is going to win overall there. So again, price, value between the two. Now, you can't talk about a concept like value without talking about what these drives are capable of, because as mentioned, they are both Gen 4 generation drives that produce a 7,000 megabytes per second sequential read. Of the two, it should be added, the Seagate goes even higher, peaking at 7,350, I believe, is the recent record there. Whereas the WD has now produced that 7,300 version because its predecessor peaked at 7,000. So now we have a little bit more parity between these two drives. You've got two SSDs here, both of which could do sequential read at 7,300 and a pinch higher. So for those unaware, sequential read is about big, blocky, easy data, your big chunk files, not your kind of small, database level files. We'll get onto that later on. But when it comes to accessing game data, accessing existing archives, and once again accessing big chunky block data, there's very little between these two. But what I will add is in my own personal testing, when I tested this on that 6-core 12th Gen i5 system with 16 gig of memory in a Windows 10 environment, despite them being identical systems, the Seagate gave me more, even though this was a 2TB drive. The 2TB WD Black SN850X gave a little bit less in sequential read than this 1TB Seagate Firecuda 530 there. And again, when the testing was being done, we used adequate heat sinks, we used adequate coverage, And overall, not only did the Seagate continue not to run as hot as the WD, but the sequential read factor was just a pinch better on the Seagate. But it was write activity where the Seagate again continued to dominate with its reported 6,850 and my benchmarks taking it to that number, exceeding that of the reported maximum 6,600 of the WD Black there. Now, when you look at official specifications online, you find if you scroll down to the little bit where they have to tell you what the test machine was, what you find is these are running during their official benchmarks with insane systems, 12 and 16 core Xeons or Ryzen 9s. These are kind of systems that are part of the 1% PC owner. They're going to be very hard to get that level, but I can tell you right now, my mid-range i5 gave better read and write on the sequential read and write there on the Seagate than it did on the WD there. Not a huge margin. The margins were relatively small, but it was still greater on that Firecuda, which I think can go down, if more than anything else, down to the NAND, that 176 layer NAND inside, overall. Now, moving away from sequential data, we can talk about IOPS on both of these drives. IOPS, which represent the smallest operation you can perform as frequently as you can. Now, IOPS are generally mentioned in 4K random, with 4K being the smallest incremental kind of data packet size, and random being just allocated all the way across it, because it's no longer the benefit of just going giant data. Now it's being spread across the entire spectrum of the NAND on these drives here. And when that happens, the drive itself not only now has to deal with general performance externally, but now it's got to be up to the task of being able to retrieve and get all of this data from all the different areas as quickly as it can. Now, in this score, the WD did better. Although both drives have reported over 1 million 4K random IOPS, in both read and write, the WD was the better overall. And indeed, in write IOPS, there was reported 1.1 to 1.2 million from the official reporting, and even on my modest 6-core i5, it's still 1 overall. Now, a big part of that is because of that controller that I mentioned earlier. When you develop things in-house in that way, you can be a great deal more focused and targeted about the architecture, because you're not developing a controller that needs to be used for a bunch of different facilities. This is a controller that is designed for a setup there, and it can be geared in a far more focused way. Hence why the 4K random IOP performance in both read and write, both official numbers and my own testing, was so much better on the WD there. So again, that's going to be one of those things where it comes down to, if you're dealing with a larger volume, higher frequency database, the WD is going to serve you. But if it's big, blocky, chunky performance data you're looking for, the Seagate's got your back. And ultimately, there's a reason why WD have been almost silent about the idea of this drive in a PS5 system compared with that, because this drive, in a PS5 system, you're never going to be able to take advantage of the full performance benefits of this, because the PS5 system and its architecture and its gearing more towards read actions than write actions and block data over IOP data means that this is going to be the better option for PS5, because although this is a better SSD, it's not going to be able to utilize any of its new skill set in a PS5 environment, whereas this drive is good straight off the bat and will have your back the whole time. Now, we talk about the whole time. That brings us to another important factor, and that is durability and endurance. For those that aren't aware, unlike mechanical hard drives that have a little spinning bit in the middle, those magnetic platters that are read in a kind of distant relationship, and therefore the effects of read and write are incredibly negligible, on an SSD, things are very, very different. What you end up with, if I was to use this box here, the SSD on the board, the PCB there, are a series of chips. Let's remove that from there. Now, these chips that you see on there, the two we're focusing on here are the two at the end. That one at the end there, near the top, that is the controller that we talked about. There's a little blob there in the middle. That's the memory, the DRAM. We can ignore that. And for now, we're just talking about these two on the end. Now, why are we talking about them? That's where the data lives. Now, where you have that TLC NAND that we talked about earlier on, the data is being applied to those. Now, because SSDs take advantage of write activity that doesn't use mechanical parts, but just just energy being passed through it, and the reading happens from it, NAND gradually, as more data is written and data is being deleted and rewritten and deleted and rewritten, slowly wear away. Not really quick. It's not like Play-Doh. It will take many years and thousands of hours, but they will wear away, and it starts to lower performance until eventually it lowers actual write activity. Now, most gamers are never going to feel this. If you're using it for caching, you might. If you're using it for editing as a scratch disk and constantly writing over it, then you might feel it after 5 years. It's the reason why most SSD manufacturers, when you really zoom in to the warranty bit at the bottom, you see this drive is good for 5 years, but also they tack in or this many write hours or this many write actions of TBW. That's why they talk about that, because they know these things have a finite utilization. Now, between these two drives, and I've alluded to it earlier on, but I'm going to talk about it again, the Seagate is by far the highest durability drive in the 7K and above PCIe 4 generation. Not only is it better than the WD, either of those WDs, it is more than double. Now, the two figures that people throw around in the SSD arena are TBW and DWPD, terabytes written and drive writes per day. These equate to the same thing, but ultimately the drive writes per day is based on, for example, a 2 TB drive, how many terabytes or how many gigabytes even you can write per day and delete and rewrite per day to still remain within that 5-year warranty or to stay on the good side of durability. Now, the WD arrives with 0.3 drive writes per day, which equates, depending on the capacity, starting at 500 gig at 150, 300, 600, 1200 and 2400 terabytes written. That's an annual figure that you can write to the drive with a refresh cycle there. Now, the Firecuda arrives with a 0.7 drive writes per day. That is massive. So that's more than double that of the WD, and it means the drive will last longer. Also means the performance will be more sustained over time. And it's also one of the reasons the drive is more expensive, because the way the data has been applied on there safely on that NAND, and to deal with it and be more enduring with that 176 layer NAND. On top of that, you find that on the Seagate model, if you go to say the 2 and the 4 TB, the NAND chips that are on board, there's more of them. So, fall on the floor. With regards to the WD, this 2 TB model has nothing on the back. The top there has 2 NAND chips we talked about earlier. That's 1 TB each on this 2 TB model. This is a 1 TB model. It also has 2 chips. Each one is 512 gigabytes each. But the 2 TB model of this separates the data on either side. It has 4 1 TB models. That's another reason it costs more, because there's more NAND and it's spreading the data over more NAND, which also results in a higher read and write action as data is being read and written from 4 things at once rather than 2 things at once. But on top of that, it allows durability to be better. That's the other reason why this drive has a reported 0.7 drive writes per day over that of the 0.3 to 0.38 on the WD. And when it comes to durability, although the MTBF is higher on the WD, MTBF has often been overlooked in modern times outside of insatiably high enterprise level as a not really great way to measure drive durability. Mean time between failure is how long the drive will last before it dies, replacement carries on. And it's not very applicable outside of a very specific user. Drive writes per day in TBW, therefore, has become the far more desired and trackable industry standard for durability. And in that world, the Firecuda wins it overall. And there you go. That's really breaking down the key specifications of these drives. Now, which one should you go for? If you are a standard gamer, you are a PS5 or PC gamer, you are someone that just wants to game, you're going to do some light streaming, you're doing some esports, your attention is pure gamer, go for it. This is just a better SSD when it comes to those sorts of services. It's got your back for the durability if you're doing streaming or content creation and casting within that spectrum, as well as overall gaming, and that lower temperature overall means it's still the better SSD. Yes, it costs more, but it's that word value once again. Now, the WD is better for price, it's better for availability, it's better for all-round use, it's much better for content creating in a more traditional post-production space there, because it has a better balancing act there in the middle. And although its durability isn't as high as that as the Firecuda, it's still a great SSD for a more multi-purpose user there. And of course, let's not overlook the fact that, again, as mentioned here on the channel and said back and forth to me during all of my testing, that the WD Black SN850 is still the recommended PS5 SSD for a reason. And in that architecture, although it doesn't have the benefits of that Firecuda as a precise PS5 user, that is going to be the drive for you. But a more diverse PS5 user, go for the Firecuda, or if you are a more diverse SSD user overall, go for the WD Black SN850X. Thank you so much for watching. Again, I try to talk about SSDs as much as possible in a more broader sense and more specialized stuff I put in PS5 videos in PC Benchmark. But if you enjoy these comparisons, I've got a few more coming up, and I will do more if you guys enjoy them. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Click like if you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you want to learn more. We've got loads more of these and other SSD videos coming very soon, as we are starting to tippity-toe into the PCIe 5 generation. Stay tuned for that, and take advantage of the guides and the free advice section linked below over to NAS Compares. But apart from that, I will see you next time.